This section explains the single refusal the whole book rests on. You may not pay the explanatory debt in the wrong currency. Every function a brain performs, discrimination, integration, reportability, Chalmers concedes to science. Call these the easy problems. What remains after all of them are solved is that the processing is lived. There is something it is like. Out. That residue is the hard problem. The move that dissolves it is always the same. Cheat, redefining the explanandum as a function, then explaining the function. Taking consciousness seriously names the constraint that blocks the cheat. Hold experience fixed as real. Decline every redefinition. Grant it, and the rest of the book is forced. You fall into the position rather than arguing your way to it. This section explains why a single word for mind hides two separate ideas. One word, mind, silently carries two orthogonal predicates. One is feeling a certain way, the other is playing a causal role. The chapter's whole work is refusing to let them collapse into one. The first is the psychological concept mind as the internal cause of behavior. This is what cognitive science already handles. A state's causal role is fully specifiable without ever mentioning experience. The second is the phenomenal concept, what it is like. This is the remainder that survives every such explanation. The move is a factoring. Subtract everything definable by causal role, and consciousness is exactly the residue left over. Descartes' error was multiplying them back together, which is why for him there could be no unconscious mind. Isolate that residue and you have the book's sole target. Everything after this hunts it. This part walks through a single dial that governs whether anything can be explained away, the modal strength of the determination binding high-level facts to physical ones. Fix that dial, and reductive explainability falls out for free. When the B facts hold across every logically possible world that shares the A facts, this is logical supervenience, and no residue survives. The physical account entails the phenomenon, and its mystery collapses into whatever bruteness already sits at the bottom. When the B facts hold only across worlds that share our contingent laws, this is mere natural supervenience, and a further question always remains: why is this accompanied by that? No reduction reaches it. The whole framework exists to hand you one test. Is a world with the same physics but the phenomenon absent conceivable? Everything except consciousness, the chapter warns, fails it. This section explains why consciousness alone resists reductive explanation. Reductive explanation is entailment. A phenomenon is explained when the physical facts logically fix it, leaving no further question open. That succeeds exactly for whatever is functionally definable. Learning, wakefulness, and reportability just are the causal roles they play, so specifying the mechanism exhausts them past. Consciousness breaks the pattern, because experience is not a role, but a feel. Fix every physical and functional fact, and the question, why is any of it felt, still stands. Chalmers gives the zombie twin, a being molecule, identical to you, functionally identical to you, yet with no phenomenal interior. Such a twin is conceivable, and that bare conceivability shows the physical does not entail the experiential. So consciousness alone escapes reduction. It is the one thing in the world, not logically supervenient on the physical. This section explains naturalistic dualism, the thesis that consciousness is a fundamental feature of the world rather than something the physics already contains. Materialism dies the moment a physically identical zombie world is logically possible. Once that world can be coherently conceived, consciousness is a further fact, not entailed by the physical ones. Kripke's image captures it. After fixing all the physics, God had more work to do. But the argument defeats only logical supervenience, not natural supervenience. Replicate the physics and you still replicate the experience. That gap is the whole thesis. Consciousness depends lawfully on the physical without being entailed by it. So the dualism is one of properties rather than Cartesian substance. There is no ghost-pushing matter around. The physical world stays causally closed. The move that generates every consequence is this. Experience joins mass, charge, and space-time as a fundamental feature of reality wired in by contingent psychophysical laws. A theory of everything is missing, one component. This section explains the paradox of phenomenal judgment. The tension is a fixed point of self-reference. Consciousness resists reductive explanation, yet every claim about consciousness is a behavioral act, hence fully explainable by physics and function. So consciousness turns out explanatorily irrelevant to the very judgments asserting it. Chalmers' zombie twin seals it. He lacks all experience, yet he reports that he is having a red sensation for reasons that never mention experience. The chapter's role in the arc is a hinge. After 5 chapters prying consciousness and cognition apart, the paradox forces them back together because the thing needing explanation, why we judge as we do, is precisely where the mystery cannot reach. Everything after must metabolize this self-referential embarrassment. This part explains what a theory does once reduction has failed and where it looks for its first bridging law. When reduction fails, the theory changes type rather than dying. What cannot be explained in terms of the physical is taken as fundamental and lawfully related to it. The psychophysical law replaces the reductive derivation, exactly as physics posits mass instead of deriving it. The chapter's wager is where to find the first such law. It looks in the coherence between what is experienced and what is functionally accessible. Every structural detail of experience is mirrored by a structural detail in awareness. The geometry of the visual field, the 3-axis order of color, all recoverable from the information poised to control behavior. Consciousness and awareness co-vary in structure, and that isomorphism is the bridge from unexplainable existence to explainable instance. This part explains why substrate cannot matter to conscious experience through Chalmers' fading and dancing qualia arguments. Substrate cannot matter to experience if you can silently swap it out. Chalmers builds a continuum between you and your isomorph, neuron by neuron, replaced with a functionally identical silicon duplicate, then forces a contradiction somewhere along it. Take the fading case first. Were qualia draining across the series, a midpoint mind would judge its experience vivid while it was nearly gone, catastrophically wrong about its own consciousness. Now the dancing case. Were qualia merely inverted? Flipping one small circuit swings red to blue, while the system, unchanged in function, notices nothing. Both outcomes are absurd. So identical, fine-grained functional organization fixes identical qualia. This is the invariance principle. the generative move is a continuity pump, a large experiential gap squeezed into a functionally invisible step. This section explains why the chapter turns to information as the anchor for a law of consciousness. The coherence and invariance principles catch consciousness only at high, vague levels, too coarse to serve as a fundamental law, so the chapter reaches instead for an ingredient, simple enough to anchor one, and it nominates information in Shannon's sense, a state selected from a space of differences. The generative move is a double aspect principle. Every information state has two realizations, one physical and one phenomenal. Experience is what certain information is from the inside, and physics is what the same structure is from the outside. Consciousness stops being an added ingredient and becomes the intrinsic face of a structure that physics already describes extrinsically. Here is how to predict the next instance. Wherever a difference makes a difference, the theory must license asking what it is like. This layer explains why machine consciousness follows from what a system does rather than what it is made of. Consciousness is fixed by what a system does, not what it is made of. That is the whole chapter, and strong artificial intelligence is its corollary. Chalmers already banked the decisive claim in Chapter 7, organizational invariance. Any two systems sharing fine-grained functional organization share conscious experience, silicon or neuron alike. So the only new work here is a bridge, showing that implementing the right computation guarantees the right organization. Once that clicks, machine consciousness is not a fresh mystery to be argued for. It is a consequence to be collected. The burden inverts. The substrate becomes a free variable. And every objection of the form, but it is only a computer now, has to explain why brains escape the same suspicion. This section explains a reversal of direction in how quantum mechanics gets tied to consciousness. Everyone else couples the two by having physics explain the mind. An observer collapses the wave function. Chalmers inverts the arrow so that a theory of consciousness explains the physics. The measurement problem asks why we experience a discrete world when the Schrödinger equation only ever spreads states into superposition. Recast that as a question about the psychophysical link, which physical structures give rise to which experience, and it becomes the book's own question. His non-reductive theory then predicts that a superposed brain hosts several distinct subjects, each perceiving something definite. This is exactly Everett's relative state picture. Collapse becomes unnecessary baggage. The discreteness lives in the mind, not in the world.